I've titled my remarks, "No Thinker Thinks Twice," on the attempt to catch Whitehead in the act of philosophizing. No thinker thinks twice, of course, is a line from Process and Reality. Whitehead adds that no subject experiences twice. And I think this is a great way of capturing what's going on in his lectures. As Dr. Pettick, Joe mentioned earlier, there's not as much repetition as you might expect, though he was teaching the same courses semester after semester. He never thought twice. He was continually developing his thoughts. I should also mention that the reason I'm giving these remarks is because Judith Jones was unable to be present, and I just wanted to mention her and her wonderful book, Intensity, that looks at a question I'll return to in a minute. Whitehead's account of a kind of atomism, its contrast with continuity, published in 1998, I believe. I would highly recommend that book, not only for its philosophical penetration, but its literary quality. So in 1924, November 23rd, Whitehead wrote to his son North, quote, "I am gradually feeling my way into a metaphysical position, which I feel sure is the right way of looking at things." Feeling is very important for Whitehead. He was a logician, of course, but also emphasized and even made aesthetics the very basis of his philosophy, aesthetics as first philosophy, you could say. And so that such a rigorous, mathematical, logical thinker would be feeling his way into a metaphysical position, I think is quite important to remember. So in these lecture notes that the Whitehead Research Project has given us, with more to come, we're granted what Whitehead scholar Gary Herstein calls a guided tour into Whitehead's ideas. George Lucas has referred to this very hall. I think he was teaching probably upstairs most of the time, but this is Whitehead's laboratory, right? And he's very much working out his ideas as he's delivering them to his students. Whitehead says in his 1922 book, Principles of Relativity, that it is certainly a nuisance for philosophers to be worried with applied mathematics and for mathematicians to be saddled with philosophy. He delivered some very difficult scientific and mathematical ideas to his philosophical students here at Emerson Hall because he felt that it was necessary for this kind of interdisciplinary bridge to happen. And I think one of the reasons that his philosophy, that the 20th century was not yet a Whiteheadian century, is because of the difficulty of this type of interdisciplinary work. And we have Whitehead as a very early pioneer in that effort. He tells his students also on September 30th, 1924, that he's going to try to get science into a form in which one can expect philosophers to understand it. But he's not just, ragging on the philosophers here. He also mentions that scientists ought to be reading poetry. They ought to be reading metaphysics. They ought to be reading novels, he adds, in order to stay imaginative, to stay flexible in their thought and not caught in a rut. So I think what we see happening in Whitehead's lectures is what he will later call his philosophical method of assemblage. He's trying to get all the ideas on the table and not yet rush to, right out of the gate, trying to impose system on our experience, right? System might be an ideal that we strive for. He wants to be logically consistent and coherent, but he doesn't want to leave anything out, and he's worried that beginning with, say, a set of axioms and principles right out of the gate risks ignoring things that wouldn't fit into that system, to that set of abstractions. And so I think what we see displayed in his lectures and his whole process of philosophizing here at Harvard is this method of assemblage, moving towards, of course, process and reality, which is his most systematic statement of the philosophy of organism. But then, by the time you get to modes of thought, where he introduces this idea of assemblage, that desire for system has kind of waned already. He's still thinking in terms of the same ideas, but he's very cautious and humble about the extent to which his philosophy of organism has finally captured everything. In this wonderful book that Joe Pettick has edited, Whitehead at Harvard, Ronnie Desmet notes that, I quote, "When new insights prompt Whitehead to change his tentative metaphysical synthesis, he does not simply turn his back on his preliminary design. He starts redesigning. He does not burn down his provisional conceptual network, but performs a careful reconceptualization to take into account what's new, what he has newly discovered, without loss of what already proved adequate." And so I think what we see happening here is how Whitehead's own process of philosophical discovery mirrors his account of the process of the concrescence of an actual occasion. Just as each newly arising occasion must inherit its past as the ground of obligation characterizing creativity, as he puts it in Process and Reality, Whitehead found it necessary to avoid demolishing the conceptual foundation he had already laid, choosing instead to remodel and redesign in light of any inconsistencies in pursuit of an always tentative sense of harmonious satisfaction. So even though no thinker thinks twice, conceptual coherence and experiential adequacy requires that we find some way of maintaining continuity with our past thoughts. As Josiah Royce might say, we're always in the present interpreting our past self to our present self, right? And I think Whitehead wouldn't want to jettison ideas he had discovered and articulated earlier. He comes up with a new idea and then he tests it against what he has already thought, adjusting as needed, and continuing to build in a creative advance. So Whitehead already emphasizes in his early lectures that process realizes values through transition, but beyond mere change. There must be retention or recurrence of value, he says. And this idea foreshadows his later assertion in Process and Reality that time is not only irreversible, but cumulative. This again resonates with Whitehead's philosophical method. Philosophy for Whitehead is an organic process of growth where earlier stages may be reinterpreted and even repurposed, but never discarded. They are objectively immortal, right? This method is evident not only in the development of his own ideas, but in his generous treatment of the history of philosophy, looking for those scattered insights that don't quite fit into the systems of Hume and Kant, but that nonetheless grant us deeper penetration into the nature of things. Whitehead, from the very start of his lectures here at Harvard 100 years ago, is emphasizing the importance of contrast when considering ideas that might at first seem in conflict with each other. On September 27th, 1924, he says that the true contrast is between atomicity and continuity, right? In Process and Reality, he gives the honor of the eighth category of existence to contrasts, which he refers to there as modes of synthesis of entities in one prehension, or patterned entities. And he adds that this category includes an indefinite progression of categories, thus explicitly constructing his categorical scheme as an adventure of ideas that is open to future redesign. So let's just zero in for a second here on this question of atomicity and continuity. Already on September 25th, 1924, Whitehead remarks, as according to Bell, that metaphysics, quote, has to deal with the individual in its complete concretion, right? And so this idea of the importance of individuality amidst the continuum, or atomicity, in contrast to the continuum, is there from the very beginning. And we might think that this somewhat challenges Lewis Ford's thesis of temporal atomism. But I think the issue is somewhat more complicated. It might not have been a sudden discovery in the subsequent semester in March or April of 1925, as Ford had it. But nonetheless, there does seem to be a gradual development here, the ingression of a new idea, as it were, over the course of Whitehead's first year at Harvard. And we can note that a change must have occurred, as again, Ronnie Desmet suggests in his one of his chapters in Whitehead at Harvard. He points out that in 1920, in The Concept of Nature, Whitehead writes, quote, "There is no atomic structure of durations." That's page 59 of Concept of Nature. And then in 1925, after his first year, almost complete year at Harvard, in Science in the Modern World, Whitehead says that the process of becoming is, quote, "a sheer succession of epochal durations." So clearly there's been a change here in his appreciation of the importance of the atomicity of becoming, which is a distinct issue, he notes, in the lecture notes at least, that this atomicity of becoming is distinct from the continuity of space-time. He's not saying space-time is discontinuous, but nonetheless, there are these epochal durations. There is a becoming of continuity and not a continuity of becoming, as he would put it, in process and reality. Very technical issue I don't have time to get into here, but I'm just trying to work through this forward thesis of temporal atomism and see what sense can be made of it. So again, Ford may have been wrong about the suddenness of this discovery, but I think that it's clear that the idea of epochal becoming did gradually ingress into Whitehead's imagination during his first year of Harvard lectures, as evidenced by the students' notes. But why is this important? And I think just a brief statement on that question. If there is only a continuity of becoming, then it becomes difficult to understand individual freedom. It becomes difficult to understand how it is that the decisions of individuals can play a role in the creation of the future. And this is true both of human individuals at the level of the psychological field as well as at the quantum level. There are real decisions being made, and the results of those decisions become objectively immortal and affect the future. And so, as Whitehead would say, the present is holy ground. We are constantly laying down the foundation upon which the future will build. Our decisions in the present will echo out as potentials to be taken up by subsequent occasions of experience. And so without some kind of individuation, moment by moment, we would not have any other way, I think, of understanding the nature of these decisions and human freedom or creativity at any scale in nature. So these ideas matter. And in the interest of making sure we have plenty of time to discuss what's been shared on this panel, I'm going to stop there and invite comments and questions from the audience. So thanks, everyone.